Hi everyone, I'm Al Flores. Welcome to my channel. Thanks for watching my videos. I really appreciate how far that video has come in the past week. 2 million views and counting. Over 1,000 subscribers. I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much. I didn't realize this was going to be that interesting to anyone else other than myself. So, that being said, comments about wanting to know the process. I should have done a voiceover, but I did not. It's too late to edit the video now. It's had too many views, so I still have most of the raw footage. I'm going to go back and do a step-by-step with a slowed down procedure so that you can see every step that I make. So, thanks for watching. Okay, first things first. Get the stone laid down. I usually take a razor blade and I scrape the face of the entire stone just to make sure that no pitting or no bugs or nothing is on it, just to get any kind of rough spots off. It's real quick and easy. It only takes a few seconds. Basically just cover the whole stone. Next, I use a little bit of granite cleaner, which cleans off the polished surface to make sure that it's nice and clean. That way anything I stick to it is going to stay. No residual dirt left over, because this stone was actually sitting outside and facing the wind, so it has a good chance of collecting dirt, debris, bugs, you name it. So I just go ahead and clean that off and make sure I have a perfect surface to work with. Next, I grab the glue. Now, we order this glue from Granite City Supplies, and we thin it down with the solvent that they have to make it a little runnier. It spreads on the stone much easier than the glue that they give you. It comes in a can. It's super viscous, impossible to spread. Real easy way to make a mess when it's thinned out like this. Now, because of the solvent, it does dry pretty fast, so as soon as I start applying, I have to get back to where I started to spread it, or that stuff will dry, and then as soon as I drag the brush over it, it actually pulls bristles out and gunks up on the stone. So I want a nice smooth surface, so I spread it out as fast and as evenly as I can. Next, we have the stencil, pre-cut. Letters are already cut out of it. We have a machine called a plotter. It comes from the CAD machine. The CAD software feeds the information to the plotter, which is then cut out by the plotter, but it does not go all the way through the back of the stencil. It's a rubber stencil with a yellow mylar background and then a white backing on top of it. Most times it doesn't cut through the mylar either. So I've already prepped this to be able to pull real easy. I cut a strip off the bottom and then reapplied that strip right where I cut it off. So when I stick it to this stone, I apply a little bit of pressure, make sure my sides are evened up so that it's dead center of the stone. I put a little pressure down the middle. It just sticks to the back barely. It's just enough to hold it in place so that when I peel this out, the exposed adhesive will then cling very well right there. So now the mylar, the backing of the mylar, is sticking to the glue. The rest of it is still able to pull off. And like any good carpenter, I never have my tools right where I need them. So I peel that back up, and this is where I take the rest of the backing off. Removing this will allow me to stick the entire stencil to the stone. Now, in most cases, you don't have to glue the stone beforehand. I like to do it just in case as an extra precaution. We have the glue, there's no harm in it, there's only a minute or so taken out of my time to do that. That ensures to me that that stencil will stay when the pressure of that sand hits that thing. It has a tendency to blow edges up, and if it blows edges up, your letters, numbers, panels, anything's just not as crisp. The sand actually is able to get behind the stencil, bounce back and forth, and wear that edge out and round it off. Now I'm taking a roller right here and rolling it down in a Z pattern from bottom to top, basically pushing any of the air that is ever going to be under there out. You want no bubbles in that stencil. If it's a bubble on a letter and you peel that letter and then you sandblast it, that means there's air there. Now right here, this line is pre-cut. I just take my knife. It's a special knife for granite tools. It's rounded and it fits right in that little line. All I have to do is just guide my hand. It doesn't even barely cut. Now when I face it straight down, it actually cuts into the mylar, which is breaking that seal. The only reason I'm doing this is because this panel has to come out. And if I were to peel it the way it is and leave the mylar backing, the rubber stencil itself would stretch all over the place and I would never be able to get it back in there the way it was. So I want to make sure I cut that Mylar so that I can peel that whole piece right back out and look at polished finished stone again. So I'm just scoring around the entire panel, making sure that that Mylar's cut. Now I take my knife and I stick it down in the corner and I pry it up like a screwdriver just to get it started, and then I do the rest. And this is the fun part, because that glue and the adhesive on that Mylar is no joke. This is not easy. This takes a little bit of oomph. And I also pull slow because there are times when you think your knife has cut the Mylar and it has not, and it will tear and stretch your stencil completely out of shape. So you have to pull fast enough to get it off, but slow enough to know if it's cut all the way through. You can see it and cut it as you're going. So basically, when I have this stencil pulled up, what you see there is what's going to be it's called frosted. It's basically when you take low pressure sand and you spray just the finish off. You're not putting any depth to it whatsoever. You're basically just taking the shine off and making it look rough. It also brightens it up, so it's a good contrast between the darkness of the gray and, after it's frosted, the lightness of the panel, which also makes the letters that, when they are V-sunk, are sprayed black, they stand out big time. Now what I'm doing here is I take my hands around the edges. Now, because my hands are dirty, I work in a dirty shop, I rub along the edges and I can see the edges. The dirt adheres to the edge when I rub, so I know where to put my glue. I don't want to just be putting glue all over the place. What I'm going to do is go around this entire border with a whole nother bead of glue. Now why I'm doing that is because when I put this in the automatic blaster, like I said, at first the panel is low pressure. I do that by hand, so I'm not worried about damaging the edges of the stone. But when I put it in the automatic blaster, the pressure is increased significantly. So one layer of stencil, when the sand hits it, it's fine. When it's able to blow and roll around an edge, where that edge is bent will actually burn through that stencil and ruin the rock pitch, the natural rock pitch. So it damages stones. So what I do, like I said, I glue all the way around the border, and I take a piece of stencil that was left over, cut off from this piece. It's all spare, I don't waste anything. I cut it to length, so I'm basically doubling up every single edge. And I found that pulling the stencil to me into the scissors, I actually get more accurate cuts, rather than just put the scissors in and push away, kind of like you would with gift wrapping. Everyone does that. Most people do that. I pull the stencil to me, and it works great. I can get a nice straight cut that way. So I'm cutting the side, I've cut the top piece. The big piece in the middle is what's going to cover the rock pitch on the bottom of the stone. So now that I've got my widths cut, I'll go ahead and get everything off the workspace, make sure that the glue is tacked up nice, and put this piece on. So now, check for width here. I follow the SERP top, which is the curve. It's always higher in the center and lower at the sides. Now I run that at an angle so that I know I'm covering the corner and the circ top. Instead of getting one big thick piece and running it across the top, I just do it that way. It's simpler. I can use a thin piece and get the same thing done. Now, anywhere a stencil is going to stick to a stencil, I have to apply glue. So now I put glue in the middle where I put the little cut, and then I put glue in the top corners, because now I have to run my sides, which is exactly the same thing I did to the bottom piece. Once I stuck it on there, I applied a little bit of glue to each corner, each bottom corner. Always do a quick measurement to make sure my length is right. And sometimes the stencil that you have isn't enough, so you have to cut pieces, and that's the case. That will be the case here shortly. So I just run it over top, make sure that the dirt line that I left on that stencil was roughly centered, and that's pretty much the gist of that. Now I do the same thing on the other side so that that stone is completely protected from any kind of sand that could bounce off and hit the pitch. Using the overhead hoist, I carry it over to, we have two rooms there. The one with the door open is the manual blast room. That's where we go in, sit down, use the sprayer, or use the sandblaster by hand. Now the door behind it is the automatic blaster, and it's a machine that's set up to go Z formation back and forth, as well as W, which is up and down. It's an amazing machine, and it has got some seriously high pressure. When that thing kicks on, you can't see anything in there. I'll get to that later. So I go ahead and drop the stone. There's really nothing more I need to do to it except get it into the blast room. Get the crane out of the way, because I don't know how many times I've walked into that thing. It's perfect height. Trust me, it hurts. Make sure all the stencil is stuck good enough. Push it into the blast room. Now this footage is from the original video because I could not find the raw footage for this. So I had to actually slow it down, which is why it looks herky-jerky. It looks like it was recorded on a stone tablet. Same process. Same thing, just slowed down a little bit, took the volume out. Now that is a blasting pot. What that is it holds sand. The blue thing you see there is to trap moisture. The air pressure goes in through the top, pushes the sand out the bottom through the hose, and that's what creates the sandblaster. That thing has to be filled quite often, especially when you're out in the field doing it and you're doing a big stone. That thing could be filled 5, 6, 7 times, and it will take, I've always used a Folgers can. It always takes about 4 or 5 Folgers cans to fill that thing out with sand. Even though it's not sand. I technically it's not sand. I say sand, but it is not. It's aluminum oxide. So right now I'm just gearing up. The hood that I put on has vent holes to breathe out of the side and the back, and in the front there's a plastic sheet so that I can see out. Now every so often, if you're out in the field and you're doing this, I want to say I change that shield about every 4 stones because it starts to get sandblasted. The sand bounces off. Now what I'm doing here is taking the edge. The diameter of the spray of that nozzle is about the size of a half an inch, or a $50, my bad. I go around the outside edge, half on the stencil and half off of the stencil. And I make all my passes overlap each other. Like right now I'm doing a Z formation. I will go half over the pass that I just made to make my next pass. And when I get to the top corner, I'll start with the W formation, up and down, up and down. I want to ensure that there is no polish left there. And I want to also ensure that it's a nice, smooth finish. Nowhere did I leave that nozzle in one direction or one area for too long and then rough it up more than any of the other stone. So it has to be nice and smooth. So I go ahead and I kick that off. There's always leftover air pressure, so I let it blow onto the wall that we have rubber attached to. Now what I'm doing is checking the stone. I want to make sure that it's nice and smooth, not finish, but smooth. And I go at an angle and I look, and if I see any shine, then I know I'm not done. I have to go hit that spot again. Worst part of the job. The dust. It is dust. We do have a very, very good system that extracts all the air from both booths and keeps air moving in the shop. So our vacuum system is amazing. It didn't take long for that room to clear out, if you noticed, when I was finished. At this point, I take we have an air hose on the wall. I pull that down and I get as much dust off of that as I can. Also trying to clean up the room a little bit because dust does come out through the bottom onto the floor into the shop. Definitely got to do that. Dusty everywhere. Now I just take what's falling onto the board there, and I created that board actually to sit on top of those rollers because I noticed that when you're sandblasting after 3-4 weeks, those rollers don't want to roll anymore because sand's gotten down in there. So I created that to sit on top of it, and it's actually worked out really, really well. I just roll that in on top of the rollers. All the sand falls on it, not into the rollers. I mean, they still need oiled, but less frequently. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this up and get it back over to the short conveyor, which I like using. I had someone comment about we have the tall rollers and we have the low one. The low one is for diamond etching, but it's a perfect height to work on stones like this because I have to lay it back. The other stones, it's perfect height for those because it's chest height almost, and that would be a normal size die. This is a slant. So once I get it back over here, I'm going to go ahead and lay it down and get it positioned so it's as level as possible. I like working on it flat like that. It's just easier to see. And sometimes those straps get caught in there, and that's fun. Especially on the heavy ones. Next step, more glue. Everything I just frosted is nice and dusted off. I want that stencil to stick to that like it was meant to live there. So I go ahead and I do the entire surface area. I get up to the edges of that stencil and past it just a little bit and spread as much, well, not as much glue as I want, but as much as needed. You don't want too much because then it won't stick. It's actually counterintuitive. It makes sense if you think about it. Too much glue and it won't dry or adhere. So I put a nice even coat across the whole face of the stone. Everything that I just frosted. Now it usually takes about 2 to 3 minutes for that to cure, to dry. And then once it's tacky, you actually put another coat. Now this was the way I was taught. I've had people criticizing that, saying that you don't need to glue it, but I feel you do because I've tried things and not always successful, so I stick with what works. If I know this is going to work, I'm going to use it. It's just a matter of glue and time. It's not that big a deal. So I'm applying the second coat here. And this is just a quick over. Once that's set and I feel it's tacky enough, I put my hand on it. Normally I look at my fingers, and if there is any kind of glue stuck to my finger, I know that it's not ready yet. When I can just barely tap that glue and I pull my hand up and look at it and there's no glue, it's ready. You get a feel for it. Now reapplying the panel can be fun if you don't know what you're doing, because as soon as that thing sticks, it's stuck. It is hard to pull back up. So I have to make sure that I get that bottom left-hand corner in as tight as I can, because I don't want any lines overlapping. I don't want any lines, any gaps. So I feed it in slowly, the whole bottom line. And I make sure that it is tucked up against that stencil that it was cut from. Now, even though I left the Mylar on the back of this rubber stencil, when I pulled it, it still stretched a little bit. It's just a little longer and a little wider than it needs to be. So once I get that bottom line in, I roll the top and I push it up against the top cut line because it is stretched, so it's a little bit bigger. Now, if you notice, once I get that stuck on there, there's a hole on my left side, right there. That hole is to let air escape. Now I'm going to start with the W form pattern and start on the right and just work that air completely out of there. Basically stretches it back to shape. So now it's perfect. No skewed letters, no cockeyed stencil. Everything is right where it needs to be. Put another roll on it, make sure it's nice and stuck. And for good measure, grab the mallet. Just to be safe. I would rather have a perfect stone than one side of a letter pop up and get sand behind it and ruin the whole stone. Now this part is actually quite therapeutic to me. It's quiet, it's calm. I peel out each letter one by one, periods. I had someone ask me why I started at the right. Well, I'm right-handed, so it's easier for me to start at the top right and work my way left. Now, I've also had people ask me if I hand cut these letters. I did not. These were cut on a plotter, so all the letters are there. It's hard to see in this video, but if I were to zoom in a little, you would be able to see that there are lines there. You can see the letters, which makes it kind of easy to pull out when you're in a well-lit room. Sometimes the plotter's knife isn't set deep enough, so it cuts mostly through the stencil, but sometimes it doesn't, and it's a pain in the butt. You basically have to hand cut the whole thing anyway, just using the lines that it cut as a guide. Most times, though, depending on temperature as well, because it was cold that morning in the shop, and these letters are a bit tricky to pull out this morning. So if it's warmer, they actually come out much better because the stencil's softer, it cuts easier in the plotter. The plotter is basically I don't know if you people know what a Cricut is, but it cuts vinyl. It's basically a printer, but instead of an inkjet head, it has a knife. So it scores the outlines of all the letters. This is actually fun. For me, it is. So you can see that the backgrounds of those letters are yellow. That's the yellow Mylar background. Rather than try to cut that out, I leave that there because the sand does blast that out and then penetrate the stone behind it. There are times, though, when you put it in the automatic blaster or you're doing it by hand, you think you've gotten it all because when it gets hit with the aluminum oxide is a dark gray. It turns to stencil gray. It's hard to see. So you have to stop what you're doing, turn everything off, and inspect every single tail, period, every angle, everything that make sure that Mylar was taken out, because the problem with that is if you leave that Mylar in there and you don't blast it all the way out, one, your letter's not going to be uniformly deep. Two, when you paint over it, that Mylar is going to wear off of that stone, and then you're going to have a light spot. So all that Mylar has to come off. Now what I'm doing is peeling the panel, the edges of the panel. That will also get painted black. So there's a definitive line between the dark gray of the stone and the light gray of the panel, and it's a really nice contrast. This is the automatic room. Now, also had people commenting that this was not enough passes. There's no way it could have been dark, or it could have been deep enough, and I absolutely agree. This is not enough passes. This is one pass. I start from the bottom right and work my way up to the top. Now, I cut out 8 or 9 more passes going back down left to right, back up left to right, for sake of time. Now, this is just to give you an idea of what the machine does. This is not spray paint. This is aluminum oxide. And you can see the diameter of the blasting head. So it overlaps as it's going left and right. And in doing that, it slowly cuts into the letters. But like I said, that is not one pass. This stone was created with at least 8 passes. I don't recall for sure, but I know. So this is the entire process. Now you can see how the sand rolls the edges over. That's exactly what I'm trying to prevent the damage from. Because if that was one layer, where that rolls that over after it's been hit once, it weakens it. It gets hit again, going back down, it weakens it more. Eventually it's going to blast a hole in it, and you're going to have a side of your stone that was sandblasted, and you didn't want it sandblasted. So once this has gotten all the way to the top, and I do this always, after the first pass, I will stop the machine, turn it off, let it air out, go in and inspect it. I have to make sure that the Mylar was cut out of every single panel line, every single letter, every single comma, parentheses, you name it. It has to be completely free of Mylar on the first pass. Otherwise, like I said, the letters won't be uniformly deep. So there might have been a little bit there. I dug it out. You're not gonna be able to tell when it comes to the next pass. All good. After the 8 or 9 passes, I grab the hose off the wall. Same process. Just blow everything back in the room. Blow the stone off. Blow the table off. Just get ready to bring it to the shop. Less dust I have to clean up later. The finished stone before paint. Now you can tell there's depth in those letters. The last name Woods is at least 1/4 of an inch deep. Sand is bad, mamma jamma. You don't want to know what it'll do to skin. Just freeing it of any kind of dust that's left over, so that when that paint goes in there, it's adhering to just stone, not dust or dirt or sand or anything, just the stone. Go ahead and get it up, get it moved over to one of the 4-wheel carts so that I can work on it, peeling it out and cleaning it off. Now, I've been criticized, and in all fairness, you guys are right, I should have worn a mask to paint this. But like I said, I rely on the exhaust system that we have. It's amazing. Still though, I should have worn a mask, absolutely. Because I do get my face up pretty close. And the arrow is showing you the direction that I paint. I go around the entire stone, facing it down and to the right. The next pass, I face it up and to the left, because those lines are V-sunk. So if I spray it directly in, odds are I'm going to miss something. So if I hit my bottom right angle first, and then my top left angle second, when I come back through, almost everything except for 50% of the V itself of the letter, which is dead center, is painted black. So it's perfect. All I have to do is a once over right in the center, face on, and the entire stone is done. As far as paint. Now, a lot of people criticize the paint. Well, that's just like Krylon or whatever. It's this paint. This paint was specifically designed to adhere to stone. It's going to last. Most times, it's just wind and debris that gets in the letter and makes it look faded. It's just dirty. You could take a wire brush, possibly steel wool, to get in there and clean that out. Just spraying a little bit of water. Sometimes when I'm working in the field, I'll take my air hose, and if I see growth on a panel right next to one that I have to do, I will hose it off just to get that stuff off of there. Makes it legible again. Now what I just did there was I took the hose and basically sped up the drying process, because sometimes that paint doesn't want to dry very fast. So now I'm just peeling off the edge. This is the easy part. It peels right off. And this is peeling it right off the polish. This is where I have to take a knife and be a little strategic about how I do it. So because it was glued on there, it wants to stay glued. So I have to pull it slow. If I pull too fast, when I pull, say, around to number 3, those 2 little islands will rip off and stay on there. So I like pulling it as I go and popping out every part of the letter. I barely touch the stone with this knife. I do most of the work on the back of the Mylar. I put it next to where I need to peel up and then just pull towards me, and it pops the letter off. So I'm not even really touching the stone, because that's a good force of habit to have. Because if you do this on a black stone and that blade touches that black stone, it will leave scrape marks. As silly as that sounds, and it's ridiculously easy to barely scratch a black stone. So when you're peeling letters, you cannot touch that stone with that knife. It will scratch. I've seen it happen. Never done it, not personally, but I have seen it done. I've seen it happen. So I try to be as thorough as I can, getting as much as I can out on the first pass. Less tediousness later. Mainly the only thing left are the islands and the O's, R's, D's, B's, A's, and the numbers. That's an easy one. And you can see the contrast between the darkness of the border on the outside, the black panel line, and then the frosted panel itself. Now it's a little brighter because it still has glue on it, but it'll actually be brighter than that once the glue is taken off and it's completely dried. Now, just for sake of ease, I take a letter island and throw it on top of another island, just kind of hold it in place. When it gets too much, I throw it on the stencil in my lap. That's basically all there is to that. Pick up the stone, set it back on the four-wheel cart. I always put it face up, it's easier to clean that way. The camp fuel that we use that cleans the adhesive off will actually pool in the letters. That way I have glue there, or have the camp fuel to spread around. If I were to do it standing up like it is, it would just run off and I would be wasting more camp fuel. The first thing I do, I grab the camp fuel and I pour it on there and I just let it soak for about a minute. I just make a nice even coat over the whole top. I don't even try to scrub yet. I just let it sit there and eat the adhesive up a little bit. Come back in after a minute or two, go to the brush. Don't even push hard. I'm basically just getting the top layer off, barely scrubbing. Once I feel I've gotten around the whole stone good enough, maybe get some thick stuff off of the letters there, I will go for the camp fuel again. Basically getting some of that excess off, rinsing it at the same time, and adding more camp fuel. The problem with the glue and the camp fuel is, and laying a stone down to clean it, is when that camp fuel dries, evaporates, it leaves glue residue on the stone. So you have to make sure that it's scrubbed completely off, because if it's down in the letters and that glue dries in there, one, you can see it. Two, it is a pain in the butt to get out unless you go through the whole cleaning process again. So I make sure I scrub it as thorough as I possibly can, adding as much camp fuel as I think I'm going to need to thin that out enough to where it's not going to stay in those letters. Next step is rinsing it off with water. Now I have to do this fast because, like I said, the camp fuel will evaporate and it will leave gunk in the letters, so I have to make sure I get everything as thorough as I can. That's basically it. That is it from start to finish. Make sure I get in the panel lines real good. Don't want any leftover residue because it will show, and my name is on this job. I take pride in what I do. Last step, turn the compressor on, kick the air on, blow off any excess water, any excess glue. Now sometimes you'll notice that if you do this on a rock pitch, some of the pitch will actually fly off, but that's fine because if it was going to fall, it was going to fall. So the wind just helped it a little. It's not damaging anything. I like to work from one side, spraying the water out the other side. That way I'm not working against myself. Spray it one way and then blow it one way and blow it the next way. I blow it all one direction and get it all out of the letters in the panel lines, just to make things easy. This is actually therapeutic to me as well, because when the stone is wet, it's all the same color. When that panel starts to dry, it dries in blotches and it's lighter. So I kind of zone out and just make sure the entire panel is dry. So you see it's starting to lighten up now. That's the finished color of the panel. Depending on how wet I got that stone and how big that stone is, it takes anywhere from 2 to 4 minutes to completely dry the face of a stone. Spray off the card a little bit. And this is it. Harold R. Butch Woods. Set the stone back down. One last inspection. Always inspecting, always inspecting. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everybody. I appreciate the likes. I appreciate the kind words. I appreciate the views. Have a good one.